Welcome to the next video. We're closing in on the finish line here. For those of you watching for the first time, welcome. I humbly recommend that you start off with the first video. What we're working on is custom painting a G.I. Joe Mobat in Tiger Force colors. When I left you off last time, I was showing you how to paint soft masks by taking a piece of cardboard and a spray can, holding it on the line you wanted, and spraying down, leaving what should be a reasonably feathered edge. We also talked about accepting the fact that spray cans, you can only do so much with it. I highly encourage you to practice that technique until you can get it down to a fine art and potentially even do it better than I am, which is exactly what I want. By the time this is done, I want you to be better than I am at doing this stuff. So I did go ahead and clean it up a bit, like I said I might. I had to touch up both colors. And just to refresh your motivation, remember that you will have to go back and, hi buddy. You will have to go back and touch stuff up. That's just a fact of customization. Even with a lot of practice, you're still gonna make mistakes, but it's all part of the process, and the process is about having fun. So, after touching up the paint, I've clear coated everything with a flat coat. That's to protect the paint and to facilitate the next step, which will be hand painting on the tiger stripes. The reason why we flat coat is because if you try to paint anything on a gloss coat, for the most part, it's a pain in the butt. So if you flat coat it first, the paint will grip onto that surface a lot better than if it was a gloss coat. So while with any custom part, you can do what you want with it, I highly recommend that you flat coat before painting. Why are we hand painting? That is a fantastic question. Well, it serves a couple of purposes. The first is to get you comfortable with the fact that you can hand paint something with a brush and it will look good. We'll show you different techniques how to alleviate, if not eliminate, brush strokes in your customs, the layering of paint, and of course, the advantages to brush painting. So let's kick off with the advantages. If I can draw your attention to the back of the Mobat here, and well, really all over the whole hull, you can see these details here, which are so awesome. Like the grills here, the exhausts, the fans, all these pipes and everything. Those would be hard to spray with a spray can. Especially doing with tiger stripes, you'd be doing a severe amount of masking. And the problem is that if you were to mask this off and use a spray can, if you had any bleed under from the masks and stuff of the paint, so the paint goes somewhere you don't want it to go, then you got to go back, cover up the black stripe, and then respray the yellow. So you'd have to remask and go back and forth. It's possible, but it's labor intensive. So I'll say that if you wish to do things that way, then by all means. All the same principles still apply, so you need to hit it from different angles and whatnot to get it in there, which should take you to why I want to use brushes to do this. Is that by using a brush, I can get paint in there on the first go, whether by holding the brush vertically or on an angle or even from the side. The other advantage to brushes is that there's more than one size. So what that gives us is control of the application. And I'll hold these up here. You can see they're all different widths and lengths and the amount of bristles in them, the thicknesses and whatnot. Now, without going down a rabbit hole of what brushes to select, what I will suggest is take a look at some videos on how people who play Warhammer paint their miniatures. The reason why I say that is because the culture behind Warhammer miniature painting is phenomenal. And if you see the detail that they can get on their miniatures and the size of the brushes they use, even for large areas, they use a brush usually no bigger than that. And while that may seem like a pain in the butt and tedious, the results I think are undisputable. So please, before you carry on, if you want to have a quick view, pause the video here and just do a search for Warhammer miniature painting. You will not be disappointed. So, carrying on, I've got my brushes arrayed here. I have my water, and the paint I'm going to be using today is Vallejo Acrylic Polyurethane Surface Primer. It's water-based, and I like using it because it goes on very thin. You can also airbrush this if you wish, and I know I keep teasing the airbrush thing, but we'll get there eventually, and you may never go back once you've airbrushed something for the first time. So, in the meantime, we're going to paint on some tiger stripes. We pre-visualized roughly where the stripes want to go, and there's a few considerations we need to take into account before we begin. The first one is that you want to keep your vehicle in separate parts. Especially for the Mobat, it's a little unique in that you have a sizable secondary piece on top of the vehicle. The vehicle itself is not just one overall shape. You have two shapes to deal with, the hull and the turret. So we're going to remove the turret for now and look just at the hull. Now, relatively speaking, this is a large area to cover, and we have a few options. What I like to do is I like to start one stripe going from the bottom up and finishing somewhere in the middle. Then I like to have a stripe that goes in the middle and goes down and comes to a point just below, or excuse me, just above the bottom here. That gives you alternating stripes. It creates a dynamic look, and it just makes for a nice, interesting, visually interesting custom. The problem with larger vehicles, with the Mobat, for example, is that if I wanted a stripe to go all the way across here and finish just above the bottom, that's one long black stripe. And visually, if you look at any of the other Tiger Force vehicles, you may notice that none of the stripes are too long because none of the vehicles are too large. So there's a way to get around this, and the example is in the Devilfish, the Tiger Force Devilfish. Or excuse me, the Tigerfish, the Tiger Force Devilfish. And that if you look at the stripes, there's actually stripes that start and stop in the middle of the model. So we have another tool in our toolbox to accomplish the aesthetic that we're looking for, which is still, in this case, trying to make it look like it's part of the Hasbro toy line. Excuse me. So how do we do that here? The best way to do it, without putting paint on the model yet, is using your fingers. So what I like to do is look at the back of a vehicle and say, okay, do I want a stripe coming up from the bottom and hooking to the top, or do I want it going across the top and hooking to the bottom? The answer in this case, after much hemming and hawing, is the Devilfish answer. So I want a stripe starting here and ending here, and I'm going to do one from the other side as well. The reason why I'm making that choice right now is because there's a lot of detail here, a lot of visual interest. And the black stripe can either delete it or overpower it or clash with it. This is something I've learned over time with doing paintings and working on models and whatnot. And this is where the balance of aesthetic with design goes. And I know that sounds a little weird and maybe I'm not using the right terms, but you don't just want to slap tiger stripes on this willy-nilly. You want them to be spaced properly, to have the proper balance between yellow and black. You want them to look like it fits on the vehicle. You don't want them too small and too wide like we talked about in the visualization process. What I'm going to do is paint them on the hull first. Then I'm going to sit the turret on and see where I'm going to paint the tiger stripes next. Which brings me to my next point. The tiger stripes on these vehicles all seem to go perpendicular to the edges or parallel in line with the brown and the white. So in that instance, with the back of the Mobat, I'm going to leave this just yellow. Because if you look at the Tiger Cat, for example, the Tiger Force Snowcat, if you look at the post that holds the missile launcher, the post, if I remember correctly anyway, doesn't have any tiger stripes on it. It's just a solid yellow piece. And there's no stripes that really contradict the parallel lines. So in some cases, I'm going to leave things blank. And while that may seem like a problem, particularly on the back of the turret here, we can fill that space with stickers. So not to get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm going to keep these parallel. And as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking that a big black stripe back here would really look to be a bit too much. And maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Again, it's your choice, it's your custom. Do what you like. As long as you can make sense of it and you like it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, as long as you're happy with it. So my stripe is going to start here and it's going to end roughly here. Which raises the next big question. How do I keep a straight line going over all of this molded in detail? And the answer is simple, and it's no different than when you learn how to draw a line when you're a kid. You don't watch the line being drawn and try and keep the line straight the entire time while moving your pen across the paper. What you do is you pick the start point, look at the end point, and move your hand to it. And I know that sounds difficult, but it's really not. And once you get used to it, it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. And if you've never tried it before, your lines will get a lot straighter. So by picking a starting point and then looking at an end point, let's say I pick my end point to be here, I just move your hand to it. Don't think about I'm trying to draw a straight line because it won't work. Sorry, that was off camera. My apologies. So picking your starting point here, pick your end point there, and move your pen to it. Your line will be a lot straighter. And don't go slow, you want to go fast. So try that on paper a few times and tell me it doesn't work and I'm crazy. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm not worried about getting paint over this detail. I'm worried about getting my stripe from here to here. In which case, I will quickly draw my outline and get to it. So without further ado, let's put some paint on some plastic. We're just shaking up our paint here. There's a pro tip, especially for acrylic paints, is it's called waking up the paint. So you take the bottom of it and basically give it a good couple of smacks there, and it gets all of the pigment from the bottom to really mix in. It goes a little bit beyond shaking. And like anything else, we're going to build this up in small coats. If you don't have access to the paint I showed you, the Vallejo Surface Primer, you can go to an art store and get what's called black gesso. What gesso is, it's spelled G-E-S-S-O, is it's a primer that artists use on their canvases. And it comes in black. The thing you have to be conscientious of is that it is a lot thicker than this stuff is. So you need to make sure that even with this stuff, that your brush is moist, which means that you wet the brush and then damp off the excess on a paper towel so that the bristles are now slightly wet. And go very carefully with this because if you use gesso, it will build up rather thickly, rather quickly. And it's a little difficult to bring back down. It's more labor intensive. So just by dipping my paint in the cap here, I'm just tapping off the excess. And I know it looks like we're being very particular about this. These are habits I picked up from Warhammer painters, which I think are phenomenal. It's a very deliberate process. So I know I want my stripe to be centered roughly on this edge here, which may not make sense at the time. And that's about the midpoint of the hull. So I'm going to end it actually right here on the edge of this, well, let's call it raised area. So all I'm going to do is put my one point right there. And it's just a little brush stroke down. That's going to be the tip of it. Now I'm going to go to the other end and I'm going to put a tip where I want that. And that's going to be roughly right there. So what I've done is I've landmarked where the stripe's going to go, between there and there. So now, for the tiger stripe shape, we're roughly going to do a design that looks like this. And I'll show you on my paper here. I'm using a very light hand, never push hard. Okay, that's the shape you're going for. It's almost like an eye shape, if you will. So you want it to come to a point at the end, you want it to bulb out a bit, or get bulgy a bit in the middle, and then come to a point on the other end. So it doesn't have to be symmetrical. In fact, it's almost better if it's not. But that's roughly the shape that we're going for. So now that I'm confident I've got my landmarked points there, I'm now going to draw that shape on the hull. You see the way I'm holding the brush is by the end here, and I'm holding it back here. Now for those of you with shaky hands or have never done this before, you're going to use both hands to paint. You're going to put one down as your steadying surface, and you're going to rest the other hand on top of that. If it's uncomfortable for you to sit in the same position for a while, then you're not holding it in a good position. You can make a fist out of your hand and rest your hand on that. So basically, you're trying to create a pivot point with your fingers and moving the brush like that. So I'm going to start at the point, and I'm going to lightly draw the brush along the vehicle. And I'm not worried about getting in all the gaps yet. That'll come after. So there's the one side. I reapplied paint on the brush. And now I'm going to come in a little more vertically. And we're going to come down the other side. And you'll see that I'm going over a lot of the detail. And that's fine, because what we're going to do is basically play one of the coolest games that we used to play as kids, and we're going to connect the dots. I'm just going to do the same thing up the side of the hull here. Nice and slow. Don't forget to breathe while you're doing this too. I know that sounds very Mr. Miyagi, but it's important, because if you hold your breath to try and get in a little bit of fine detail, you'll actually start shaking more. So just breathe, go slow. and just draw your outline right up to there. So now you have your rough outline for your first tiger stripe. So there's no detail down here, so the line goes a lot better. And you can see that there's some spaces missing there, but that's okay because now I know exactly where I want it to go. So all I'm going to do now is take the brush and I'm going to move the hull a bit and I'm going to angle it so I can get paint along the whole outline. Just like this. Reapply some paint. Not a lot, just a little bit. And I'm going to work the paint into those spaces, maintaining the same shape. We're just connecting the dots, that's all. Connect the dots. Hopefully you can hear and are enjoying my background music. I don't have a super fancy setup as of yet, but when I'm doing this, I like to listen to the G.I. Joe background music. And I do that when I'm building my models as well. If I'm doing sci-fi, I'll listen to, if I'm building something for Babylon 5, I'll listen to the Babylon 5 soundtrack, Star Wars, etc., etc. Because it's like theme music, right? Gets you into it. So there we go. And a little bit more over here. And there you go. So now what we've done is we've completed the first solid outline for our first tiger stripe. It doesn't matter if it's solid yet because we're going to fill it in. So now I'm going to fill in the top portion here with my detail brush. And all that is doing the same thing again, and I'm just filling it in nicely. We're not trying to use too much paint because we don't want it to glob up. I'd rather go over this 2, maybe even 3 times rather than do it once with a whole bunch of paint on there and have it look like, well, it wouldn't look very good. So now I'm just filling in those details. And you can see that if the paint doesn't adhere all the way and I can still see some yellow through there, I'm leaving it for now, letting it dry, and then coming back to it, because what you might end up doing is just pushing the paint around. And I'm just filling in all the spaces between here. And while we're doing this, we want to make sure that once we're done this first set of stripes, that it still works with our design. Not that I'm saying you would second guess yourself after putting paint on, but once you're done your first set of stripes, take a look at the rest of the vehicle and make sure that you're still good to go. You may have to adjust your plan on the way, and that's fine, as long as you don't let it get away from you. And if it does, that you can rein it back in. It's almost like a wild horse. Hopefully it doesn't buck at you, but you get my meaning. So again, I'm just lightly putting paint in there. And sometimes if the brush goes a little astray, you might be able to see it there. I have a little bit of a fudge line there. Then all you do is draw the tiger stripe out a little bit. And there you go. And this is working just nicely. What I like about this paint, and Citadel paint is good for this as well, is that, and there are others paints out there, those are just the 2 that I use right now that pop into my mind, is that a lot of these paints are self-leveling. That doesn't mean that you have full license to slap this stuff on, it'll magically level itself out. If you put it on with a paint trowel, it's going to have waves in it. But acrylic paint over the years has become so much more popular, and they've come out with new product, and it's been made to be more brush friendly, especially for the miniature gaming market, that it really is fantastic. And they're never stopping bringing out new colors. Vallejo, for example, if you've never seen that paint line before, has multiple sub-lines. So for example, they have military colors, but then they also have a series called Game Color. So it's all almost like their version of Citadel paints for Warhammer, where they have paints with funky names that don't mean anything in particular, but they sound cool. So anyway, all that's to say that you have options, and options are always good. I'm going to extend that just a little bit out the top here. And I apologize if the angle's not the best. I'm trying to show you this as I go and show you at the end of each stage. But I need to be able to paint this accurately, and that's a little hard to do while holding it for the camera as well. So please bear with me here. Oh, there we go. That's fantastic. And for those of you wondering, there are other paints out there. So I love using acrylic because they don't stink. I have pets in the house. Maybe you got kids. And just for your own sake, Enamel paints, which are oil-based, are they're a little smelly. They're technically more durable, but acrylic paints have come a long way. Most acrylic paints are water wash-up if you don't use the company's thinner that it comes with. That's another recommendation I have, is if you want to get in with Vallejo paints, use Vallejo thinners and all that stuff. Or water is fine too. And that's what I like about it, is I'm only using water, so I'm not dealing with anything toxic. Speaking of that, just like the don't drink the goo gone, acrylic paint's not toxic. That doesn't mean that you should be drinking it. It makes me shudder that I have to say that out loud, but it's the world we live in right now, so. And there we go, just the first layer, but I'd like to show you the progress so far. So there it is. You have your first tiger stripe on there. What I'm going to do now is, without much talking, maybe you can just enjoy the background music, or maybe I'll just keep talking. I'm going to put the same stripe on the other side so you can see what I mean. But there's our first tiger stripe, painted, no problem. And you can see there's black paint in all the little detail areas and whatnot. And it's not done. We still have to go over it again. It's still got some splotchiness to it. But we're well on our way, and the paint application was nice and smooth. There we go. And I'm making sure that there's no hard streaks or any globs of paint that I need to smooth out. There we go. So let's try the other side. First, have a sip of decaf coffee. Excuse me. Now, if you have shaky hands or you're a coffee drinker, before you do something like this, I highly recommend switching to decaf, because there have been times when I've been fully coffeeed up and, well, it looked like I was drawing an earthquake on an oscilloscope more than I was trying to draw a tiger stripe. So what we're going to do now is we want this tiger stripe, this new one, to end roughly symmetrically with the other one. So we're not looking for perfection. You don't need to pull out your marker and start measuring anything, by all means, because you want a little bit of organic flow to it. But we want it to be balanced. And the difference between balance and symmetry is a mirror version of something else, whereas balance makes it look right without being exactly the same. It's actually a cool trick that artists use all the time. Whereas if they have one large object on one side of the canvas, on the other side of the canvas, to balance it, they might put multiple smaller objects. And it'll look totally natural, but if you know to look for it, you'll be like, hey, they totally balanced that out. Symmetry bad, balance good. Excuse me. Unless we're using, doing the shark mouth thing, then symmetry very good, but not required. And why is this guy giving us all these contradicting things, saying that symmetry is good, but we don't have to do it? Well, the answer is simple. Like it or not, this is an art. And there will be multiple different answers to a lot of your questions. I'm gonna plunk that tip right there, so there's my landmark. And that's just it. You can agree or disagree with my techniques. You can agree or disagree with my color choices. And you could go with something completely different. And that's what makes this awesome, right? Is do what you like. Here's my landmarks. And as I said in our first video series, if you didn't watch it and you're just joining me for the Tiger Force, what I like about this is that you can do what you want. I will never tell you don't do this, don't do that, unless it will actually physically ruin your custom. I won't say don't use clashing colors. I won't say don't paint while you're standing on your head. None of that stuff. I'll make recommendations. I may give you fair warning about certain techniques, but I will never tell you don't do it. At least I hope I do. And if your brush starts to get a little dry, which may happen, just dip it back in the water, blot off the excess on your paper towel, and reapply paint. You don't want to go through the whole project without re-wetting your brush once, because that's just asking for trouble right there. And there we go. And you don't want to go too straight with these lines. They can be a little wavy. Because what we want is it looks like a tiger stripe. And if you look at a tiger stripe up close, there is some waviness to it. And I mean a tiger stripe on a real tiger. I'm not recommending that you get out of the safety zone of whatever zoo you might be at and go pet a tiger. I'm just saying, look at the tiger stripes themselves, and there are little differences. It's funny, I've got to put these warnings up on everything. It's like, oh yeah, don't drink Goo Gone, don't eat Tide Pods. Like, man. You know, like when I grew up, it was come home when the lights were turned on, that sort of thing. Things are different now, I'll tell you. Maybe that's why we do this, so that we can have a little bit of flashback to those simpler times. I mean, back then we didn't have the internet, so I couldn't have showed you all how to do this sort of thing. You'd have to guess on your own. You might have a bunch of spray cans in the landfill because everybody tried things that didn't work and couldn't listen to other people's ideas. I can't tell you how many problems I've solved just by looking them up on YouTube. It's been fantastic. Just to be like, how do you do this, right? Anything from G.I. Joe Customs to other stuff. There's good and bad out there, and for all I know, you're judging my stuff as being bad. But it's an option. That one's a little wider than that one. Where did I push that down to? Okay, so I've got my second one on there. It's technically done, but it's a little off. What I'm trying to do is balance the sizes of them. And I've made this one a little thin. So all I'm going to do is push out each side of it. And what I mean by that is just make it a little wider. The tip is still going to be the same, but it's just going to be a little beefier. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make it a little bit longer too. When doing tiger stripes, it's all about proportionality. You know, if you're going to make it wider, you don't want to make it too much wider, because then it'll just look like a fat blob of black paint. So you may have to make it larger as well. And it's better to do that on the restrained side. So be conservative when you're doing that, because it may get away from you, and then you have this one ginormous tiger stripe that you can't do anything about. So what have we got here? There we go. So now we have the second tiger stripe on. Okay, you can see the shape there. I might actually bring it over a little bit more, but it's balanced with this tiger stripe. It's not symmetrical to it, so it's not an exact representation. They both still need some cleanup and some more paint touch-ups, because you can still see some yellow through there. But that's the stage of how it goes. In fact, while I'm talking to you, I'm just going to do it right now, because I'm like Bob Ross. I'm very relaxing, so I'm going to let you watch me paint, just so I can accomplish what I want. Now, there's an interesting kind of optical illusion going on here, in that if you use this fan as your center point, it's actually not centered on the tank. So if we take our brush and use it as a reference point, it's actually off to the side of the turret ring. So we actually want to bring, that's what's causing this to look weird. So now we know that the center of that is there. So now I can bring my other tiger stripe a little bit more forward. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we're going to go probably there. Right? We're not looking for, I know it sounds like I'm talking symmetry, but I'm not. It's balance. It's not going to be exactly there because I'm not measuring anything. Will it be eyeballed and close? Yeah. Yeah. Tip there is getting away from me a bit. There we go. We'll just bring this down here too. There we go. So now what I've done is I've brought that tiger stripe closer to the physical middle. And what that does is it actually helps create some visual interest, because it's offset from what you think is the center of the rear hull. But it's not. The center of the rear hull is over here more. So we've created some visual interest there, and we've got two tiger stripes on. Now that's all using this fine detail brush here. So I want to show you what you can do with a wider brush. Not too wide. None of these brushes are going to be like a 4-inch house painting brush. I highly recommend you don't use that. And there we go. And when you're done painting your brushes, don't ever push them on the paper towel this way to dry them. Always pull them in the direction that the bristles go. And what that helps do is reform the brush, and it doesn't jam up the bristles or bend them. I'm honestly not the best guy for always maintaining my brushes, but that's one of the things I do try to do every time. So I'm going to take this wider brush here. It's relatively flat. It's a little curved because it's old and I've used it a lot. But I'm going to put some paint on there, and I'm going to fill in some of the tiger stripe in here. And the reason why we do this, well, quite honestly, it's faster. The other reason being is that it can help alleviate, it gives you less brush strokes because you're covering more surface area with each stroke. And I'm running out of paint in my cap here. I like dipping my brush in here just because it holds some already, and you're not guessing. If I were to stick my brush down into the bottle itself, well, it'd probably come out half covered in paint. The good thing with Vallejo paints as well, and Warhammer paints, the Warhammer paints are probably the best for this. They have a built-in kind of mini cup inside the lid. So once you shake the paint and open up the lid, there's a little cup up top here that holds it. Vallejo kind of has it, but they have a squeeze bottle format. So you squeeze some into one of those little dollar store paint palettes like we used when we were kids. And that way you don't have to use the whole bottle. It does take some getting used to about squeezing out how much paint you actually need. But once you get a hang of it, then you're good to go. And this brush will deposit more paint because it's larger. And it should decrease the number of brush strokes you need. If I go silent at any time here, it's just because, not because I've run out of things to say or I'm second guessing myself, but that's my concentrating face that I'm making. And I know this video will be a little bit long, but this is kind of a long process. And it's also the best one because what happens is this is the time when the custom really starts to come alive. When you use more complex patterns like this, Python Patrol, anything else, it's the paint that makes it. With simpler designs, it's usually putting the stickers on. Once you put the stickers on this one, you're going to be beyond excited, which is so much fun. I love that feeling. It's that feeling of accomplishment because you just did something very, very worthwhile and you did it yourself. And if you don't own any Tiger Force vehicles, and this is your first Tiger Force vehicle that you'll own because you made it yourself, that's super cool. And I'll give you a friendly warning is that once you start doing Tiger Force, it's a little hard to stop. So I would maybe, well, be prepared to want to do more than one. And I think that's good for right now. On that one, I'm just going to turn it around and fix the other one. So if you have any questions during this whole, for any of the videos I've done or anything else, just pop them down in the comments. And I'm going to challenge you to not worry about asking a stupid question, because the stupid question is the one you didn't ask. And I'm a firm believer of that. And just to motivate you, I'm putting these videos up on YouTube. For all I know, however many views they're getting, there could be a bunch of people saying that this guy's, right out to lunch or something. And I don't care because people ask me how I did mine, so I'm doing it. If you have a question you need to know, ask it. And don't forget when you're asking about stuff to say please and thank you. Manners I find are in very short supply nowadays. And really, you do still get so much more with good manners. All right. And I want you to remember when you're doing these Tiger Stripes, if it isn't absolutely perfect, don't worry, because if you do own a Tiger Force vehicle, or even if you want to Google Tiger Force vehicles, there are flaws. And if Hasbro can make flaws, then so can you. So there we go. I'm going to widen that up a bit right there. Yeah, I like where this is going. Hopefully you do too. And don't let detail stop you from painting something. So you see that Tiger Stripe got a little narrow there because this wall here was stopping the brush. I'm now forcing the paint over top. Because I'm telling the detail, I don't care that you're there, you're getting Tiger Force, baby. And there you go. Different, but same. That's balance. So I'm going to give it a quick pause and we'll put a few more on here and then I'll show you what I mean by alternating Tiger Stripes. So just hang on for a sec. Okay, and we're back. That took me a good long time to finish. That's each stripe done with a few coats. Could it be anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4? I can still see some areas I still have to touch up. But there you have it. We now have the tiger striping placed on the hull. And if you see what I did, I took a complete tiger stripe and put it on that corner when we started. And I realized that I needed to do the same thing here. But what avoids repetition is the fact that this one's actually longer than that one, right? Balance without symmetry. Then in order to counteract the fact that I have two tiger stripes ending back to back, the next one came from the bottom and went towards the middle. Same thing on the other side. And then I alternated again, so the tip is now at the bottom here. So what you get is a nice version of balance without symmetry. Now if you see that and count the stripes, there's only 4 on each side, and yet it fills up that area nicely. There's a good balance between the yellow and the black, in my opinion. You may disagree, in which case you need to find out the ratio that works for you. What I've done is when I drew out the tiger stripes, as I worked down the design, I want to make a recommendation, is that it's best to start with a stripe that's too narrow than one that's too thick. This one here may be a little on the thick side, but it certainly balances things out. There is something you could try to do, which I'll mention later on, to repair a stripe that's too thick, but it's always better to start thin and make it wider than start wide and then try and get rid of the paint. So you might notice this large area here that seems to have nothing in it. Well, in the case of the Mobat, once you put the turret on, you can see that area disappears. This still has yet to receive its tiger striping, but the reason why I'm showing this to you is that what I find aesthetically is that the balance between the yellow and black with the stripes and the yellow undercoat there is quite nice. I am very happy with the way that turned out. I find that the ratio of yellow to black balances with Hasbro made vehicles. If you want to change the style, maybe you didn't like the way Hasbro did it, then you've got to change the size and number of your stripes. But if you're following the same goal I am right now, then there it is. And as you can see, it's starting to shape up rather nicely. And the reason why I'm showing you this now from the side with the turret on it is, in the case of the Mobat and some other G.I. Joe vehicles, you might have, in this case, normally the tiger stripe pattern ends where the brown and the white come in. But because the turret sits where it does, and I didn't want to put the brown and the white on here, because if I turn the turret, then it would look off, I think. You could do that, certainly. It's just a choice I made, a design choice. Because we're carrying the tiger stripe pattern up to here, because this stripe down here disappears under the turret, I'm actually going to start my tiger stripe pattern on the turret right here. And I'm going to have a tiger stripe come and point upwards. And then I'm going to base the rest of my pattern off of that. So all that's to say is you don't have to start at the back and work your way up. Maybe there's a particular feature you want, let's say in the middle here. Okay, I want that to be a stripe that ends in the center. So I'll start this one on the bottom, and then you could branch your pattern out from either side. So don't be shy to not start from one end and work your way the other way. This is why I left the turret separate, and I wanted to do the hull first, because the hull is, in my opinion, the anchor point for the whole scheme, right? How much white we have, how much brown we have, and how much yellow, and then how many and where we put our tiger stripes. And now that I've anchored the design in that, once I put the turret on, I can now do the turret and make it work with this design. Because if I had started the turret, and let's say I put a stripe down here in line with this one, well then you would have two tiger stripes on top of each other, both pointing in the same direction. And that would mess with your eye a little bit. So by doing this, and I'm going to bring a tiger stripe up here, what that does is it allows me to balance the design and carry the tiger pattern forward on the turret in a way that matches the vehicle. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly paint this tiger stripe on to show you exactly what I mean. And while you're doing these, I went back and forth between the super fine brush and this wider brush. And don't be shy in the same paint application to put one brush quickly aside, get paint on the other brush and put it in there. I was hot swapping brushes as I was going. Don't be shy to do that. Just remember to keep your brushes moist, and always, when you're cleaning the brushes off, wipe in the direction of the bristles like I'm doing up here. Okay? It may seem like a simple thing, but it's important. So the same pattern here. Let me give my paint a shake up. I know it's not centered on the camera yet, but I need to have some space to work, and I'll show you the end result in just a hot second. And I'm doing the same thing again. I'm placing my landmark at the top of the turret, and I'm going to go, let's go right there. I can always add to it later. And then I'm matching the bottom of the stripe with the thickness of the stripe on the hull, or at least close enough to it. And I'm looking at my endpoint and drawing my line. And like I said, we're not worried about going 100% straight, right? That's not natural. But we are following an overall direction, and I want to make sure that I do that to the best of my ability. And there we go. I'm just going to cover the bottom here, and I think that one's wide enough that I can actually... Yeah, I'm going to bring that in with the wide brush. I'm also going to show you what I'm doing with the bottom of the turret. It's important to know what you're going to do with certain parts if they form a little cavity or an indent, if you will. It's important to know that before you slap paint on plastic. Always have a plan, or at the very least a general outline, for what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Because in this case, it's an extreme pain in the butt to try and take the paint back. You can still do corrections like we've talked about in previous videos, but the closer we get to the end, especially with spray paint, the more involved it gets, and I promise you, it's not even remotely fun. That's not to say it wouldn't be necessary. There's a hot swap of brushes for you right here. I'm just going to bring the tip up a little bit more over the top. There we go. Just a bit. And just by cresting that surface to go vertically on the hull here, will just help the pattern out overall. There's no 1 + 1 = 2 answer for this. It's art. So you've all always heard that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Well, it's no less true here. For those of you watching, you may be disagreeing with my design choices, but agreeing with my technique, or vice versa. And that's just the nature of the beast. So we'll get a few more in there. That's good for the first application. So here's what I did. I matched the stripe going vertically on the turret with the stripe going, or excuse me, with the oh wow, this is why we switched to decaf. The stripe pointing up on the turret with the stripe pointing down on the hull. Because now what we've done from a visual standpoint is carried the pattern on and made it blend together. Now what I'm going to do to the bottom of the turret is very simple. You can see that the turret has a separate piece in here. And in this case, it's riveted or something in there. Those aren't screws, or else I would have taken the whole turret apart. But you can see the gap in between the parts here. So that's as far as I'm going to take the painted piece. Because if you notice on lots of G.I. Joe vehicles, if they didn't have to paint a scheme in a certain spot because it would be a pain in the butt, then they didn't do it. And I'm going to do the same thing. So we're just going to carry that black line on down very carefully. Or at least carefully enough, to the bottom of the turret. So now all I've done is come around the lip of the turret there to the end of that piece with my tiger stripe going up. And again, you could make your own design choice in that regard. All this is up to you. I'm just showing you the way I like to do things. Modify to your own desires. So what I'm going to do now is carry on the design based off of that, what I call anchor point. So now that I've anchored the design there, my next tiger stripe is going to go over the top, and the point is going to end down here. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick pause, and we're going to carry on with the design. Okay, let's wrap this one up. This is the longest video yet, and that's just to show you how long this process takes. So I wanted to show you the final, I still have some touch-ups to do, but I want to show you the final results here of how I distributed my Tiger Force pattern. And you may disagree with it. Maybe you want more stripes, less stripes, thinner stripes, thicker stripes, but this is just to show you the application process. Some of my design choices are going to be influenced by the fact that we need to put some markings on this, which shouldn't stop you, but in one case, when we talk about it in the next video, you'll understand what I mean. and we'll talk about balancing things out with stickers. What I'd like to point out here is one of those tricks. You see how there's this big yellow patch right here? Technically, there shouldn't be anything there because it would screw up the pattern. But your eye's not looking necessarily for another tiger stripe. It's looking for the color black. So the trick behind that is to fill this space in with black stickers. Once you do that, your eye will go, okay, that's cool. And it will actually blend it in with everything else. So right now there may seem from this angle a big gaping yellow spot there. But once you put the color black in there, in this case in the form of stickers, it will actually help alleviate that problem. But there you have it. So this has taken me a few hours. So the keys behind this are landmarking the start and stop point of your tiger stripe. You could even landmark the middle, and it's better to start thin and work your way up. And using a thinner detail brush mixed in with a slightly wider flat brush will help you get the desired effect. Expect to do more than one coat, and remember, it's always better to start out thin and work your way out than go too far and figure out what's up. So throw a like on this video if you liked it. Please subscribe, and we'll take us into the final steps once I get this clear coated of painting the shark mouth and the eyes, and we'll be able to put some stickers on this thing. So until next time, and remember, have fun.